Welcome to another tutorial for the OPC, for this wonderful little sequencer. Today it is not a beginner's tutorial, it's a tutorial for the step components. So if you have no clue about you basically record something and how you edit sounds, then I would recommend that you first check out my older tutorials, which are like basic tutorials, and then check out this one. But don't forget to check this one because it is about the step components. In my opinion, the step components make this OPC into an outstanding device, because it's far more what a normal step sequencer is offering to you, and it also will change the way how you arrange your songs, and it gives you a lot of inspiration to make your static tracks much more lively. Basically, what is step components? Step components are those 14 keys which you can find here down, with this cryptic kind of symbols. And when you go on the webpage of Teenage Engineering, check out the manual on the step component reference chart 6.4, then you find this chart, which might be not fully explaining you what it means, because it's just really short terms like multiply or ramp up, ramp down, with then 3 steps, 1 octave explanation. And therefore I want to go a little bit deeper into it and explain it to you. So it's basically these 14 step components. Some people might have been thinking, is it somehow also related into the punch-in effects? No, it is not, because punch-in effects is also the black keys, and only on the white keys with these symbols is the step component. What does it mean? Basically, I can put on every step, on every sequence, so meaning on 16 steps of my sequence, actually at the end all step components at the same time. But basically makes more sense to use specifically ones, and I will go through them. There are step components which change like the duration of note, the number of notes, which change the timing of the song, which change the velocity, which change the pitch of the note, even parameters and filter settings, and all this can be changed with the step components. And also not only tonality and pitch, you also can change the signature of your track, meaning you can expand it, the number of steps, far more than 16 or less than this, and also put dependencies on a counter, for example, that counts through and says, okay, always when it has run 4 times 3 through, then I want to change something. Also, like you can say, okay, I want that there is some kind of ramp of notes on the same note which I pressed, but it goes up after 4 steps until 1 octave and plays in between the 3rd, the 5th, and so on. All this I can define with the step component, and basically it's a massive tool. A lot of people have not checked it out so far, therefore I wanted to do this tutorial to show a little bit the, let's say, the core of the machine with these step components. So first of all, we search a empty track with nothing on and put some notes in, basically just one here and one here. And now it's about how do I select the step components. Really easy. I also get always directly the feedback from the OPC by pressing the shift button, and then the step I want to affect with my step component. It could be 1, it could be also more, and it can be also like notes where is basically no note inside, so an empty step cell, so to say. At the moment I only select the first step, which was this note here, with shift and pressing it, and then I activate the step component by selecting the one I want to use. We start now with the first step component, which is called pulse. But before I press it, just to explain you, I can have as many as I want. a step components always consist of two different keys, meaning first of all you put in the component itself and then the number, which means sometimes multiplying it with this number, but it also sometimes means total different things and different values like random function or realigning to a global track and all these things. And when I have put it a step component and for example many step components, then I have various ways to edit again by, for example, just selecting it and pressing the step component itself and changing its value, or quickly pressing it and erasing the step component, the certain one, or adding some new ones. And when I want to erase one step component completely, there is two ways. I press the step and then the stop, and it walks through and the step component is then gone. Once again, yeah. And the second way is of course with shift and stop, and I erase all the step components. So if I have a step component, a single one, and I want to erase it, then I just click the step and press stop, or I erase them all by shift and stop. Okay, so now we go into the first step component. Besides, I now just talking about this one track. Of course, you can have for all the 8 tracks separate, and also for some of the MIDI tracks separate step components. Of course, not for all the parameters, but for many of them. So basically, we start with the first step component. We will go through like it's mentioned on the reference chart with the so-called pulse step. What does the pulse step do? I select it, I press it, and there is a, let's say, default value of 4. I now press 3, meaning now will be played within this step 3 times the same pulse. And then the sequencer goes on, meaning when I now switch on my metronome, I instantly can hear that the timing is going, of course, off and creates a new kind of rhythm, which can be nice, but there's also a way how I can sync back my other notes onto the click track. It is called the align to global track, and now I do only once, jumping into a different step component just to show you how I can realign my track after I have changed its rhythmic context into the whole master track, like I did here with this pulse track. It is so that I then select one step which is long enough before the next step I want to be in time, meaning in this case it's a quarter note. Why did I use that? Simply because this step component is consisting in its step itself 3 pulses, meaning it's 3 16th notes extra, which is put it extra into the 16th note, meaning we lose some timing. So I have to go a few steps before to then define my function, and this is done with the button here, the white key after the 8, it's the jump, and then pressing the number 9, and then it's aligned back to the global track and the global timing. Of course, I will further then explain more about this step component. For the moment, I think it's interesting to just know how you get back into timing, because you can go crazy with step components and completely deform the rhythmic structure of your tracks. And at one point, you might then want to go back into the original timing, and this you can do with this. Okay, so the first step component was, as I told you, for putting extra pulses into this one step, changing and pushing further, nudging further all the other steps. And I can use here also like 4, then it's 4 times, 5 times, 6 times, 7 times, 8 times. And finally, I can use random on the 0, then it's each time differently. So much about the pulse. The next step component is the pulse hold. What does the pulse hold does? It takes the length of the sequence and multiplies it with a factor, the number of count what I put in, to make it then longer by also nudging all the other steps further and like inserting into this one specific step like these extra signature beats. So I do it. I use now like number 4 to make it really long. And you can see you can even see it better how it rests and stays on this step. When I put it longer and put there a 8, then you can see that the cursor is not going further, it just stays on this step. And now it starts to run. And of course the same like with the first step component, the pulse. On the pulse hold we have on the 0 a random function for the length of the note. So far quite easy. I put off the metronome. It's getting sometimes a little bit on the nerves. The next step component is the so-called multiply. The multiply is not changing your rhythmic structure of the track because it uses the cell itself and divides it in the amount of counts you put in and plays then multiple notes. Meaning if you have one single 16th note in your sequencer, it makes, for example, with the value 2, a 30-second note out of it and plays it twice. So we try that out. And it's a 30-second and it's not changing the signature of the track. You can also see it's running smooth through. Of course, you can use their higher values like for triplet. You can use 4th, 5th times dividing it. And going on till 8 times. And then on the 9 comes something different. It is called then the broken chord. And to show you what the broken chord means, I put in a broken chord on this step. No, basically I put first a chord in. A C minor chord. So first of all I have to prepare this track to make it possible that it's playing in poly mode and not in mono mode. So now I can hear my C minor. And if I now use this step component, multiply at 9, it will break my chord into little tiny pieces inside of the cell. And on the next step component, number 0, we have something opposite, which is a quantized function. Of course, you always can use the overall quantize, but sometimes you want to keep like the natural way how you played your track, and it's only about a few notes which you want to quantize, and this you can then do with this quantized function. I show you. I, for example, record like a broken chord now in. Well, this was no good example, so I take it away again. So. And now when I use the quantized function, which I have a multiply 0, then it is not broken into these tiny pieces like it was before on the second note. Then it is played in a natural way. together. So here it is broken, like unsynchronized plate. And now I synchronize it with the multiply and 0. And each step is separately quantized, while the rest of the sequence is still coming completely in its own natural timing. I can show you that because it's so they are not quantized. Good. That is the step component called multiply. We come to the next step component, which is called velocity. Velocity simply does what velocity should do. It changes the volume or the velocity of the sound which is played there on the sequence. And we have normally a default velocity with the value of 5, meaning this is the original velocity what I have played into the sequence. And I put a few more notes in and I copy them all the same notes, to show you different velocity values. For the first step component, we use the default. For the second, we use a lower value. It is -2, no, even -3 in this case, on button 2. For the third note, we put more loudness. And for the fourth note, we put the number 9, which is then a mute. One is really silent. So now let's put it again. So we have first the silent one, then the standard value. I put now also like the first again more silent. It's now so silent that you cannot hear it. Number 2. Then I put the third one really loud on the value 8. And the number 4 is on 9, meaning you put the velocity on 0. There is still a note in the sequencer, but it's having the velocity of 0, so you cannot hear it. And we have finally, as a last one, and now I select them all, what is always possible. We use the 0 for the velocity step component, and then we have random velocities, which is actually really nice. I show it to you on a different kind of track type. We use a hi-hat track and select some hi-hat sound and put here in our 16th notes. And then we put, for all the second and notes, not the main signature, we put a velocity with random. And then you have already a kind of more natural sounding hi-hat instead of this static one. Putting then a little bit shuffle with metronome. We have a nice sounding hi-hat. Okay, so much about this hi-hat and how we can use velocity. We go back into our lead sound. So, and put in some notes. So switch off the hi-hat. And we go to have a look into the next two step components, which are quite similar. The one is called ramp up and the other is called ramp down, meaning it's the same, just opposite. So the one goes up with the notes. And now comes the logic behind it. How does it go up? We put now a shorter loop here, only 4 steps on this one note to hear it directly. And then we say we want to have a change with the ramp up with the value 1, meaning it takes 2 times to go through the sequence. Then the note is played 1 octave higher. With the number 2, we need 3 steps, 3 times to go through to have 1 octave. So it will go most likely like this. And so on. We can, with the next step, then define 4 steps, 4 times going through the sequence for 1 octave, 5 step times for 1 octave on number 4, 6 steps for 1 octave, and then on the number 6 it switches to 2 steps for 3 octaves. We show that. Two steps, 3 octaves, and the next is then 3 steps for 3 octaves, and then we have 4 steps. Basically it's more steps, more counts till we get to the octave. 10 steps. And the same is of course with the ramp down. We now do the same note here and put a ramp down on it with the same value. We use here like 6 steps, 3 octaves. I think we did here number 8, so it was 4 steps for 3 octaves, and we do the same opposite, for this 8, and then you see 1, this note going up each time, 1 more till it reaches 3 octaves, and the other one does the opposite, going down. So they cross at one point. You can nicely start there if you know the Rheingold from Richard Wagner. It's having exactly these 2 movements of the waves, one as a ramp going up and the other going down. It's a really nice function of the sequencer, which can easily create for you this kind of sequence with only using 2 steps on the sequence. And putting some delay on. And then you can happily, for example, transpose it. So these are the step components called ramp up and ramp down. And the next step component, I erase this track quickly and put away the echo again, which I put it here. I erased the wrong one, so here we are. And let's take the echo away. And now we use again this sound which we used before. So, and now we have a look into the next step component. It's called the random. The random does actually something similar like the ramp up and ramp down, because it tries to reach a certain amount of notes within a certain amount of number of steps, like having 1 octave and 2 steps on the number 1, having 3 steps for the first octave, 4 steps then on the next for 1 octave, and so on, but on a random mode, meaning it doesn't play it exactly static as it does it on the ramp mode. I show you this by putting these 2 steps in, and I use here 2 randoms on these both notes, and we have on the first one a random 1, and on the second one a random 4. meaning the first does within 2 steps 1 octave, and the 4 does 5 steps for 1 octave, but it uses the steps itself in a random way. It's now part of the scale, which would be normally the steps in a ramp up to these notes, but it plays randomized the notes for it. And here you also have, like with the different values, then a change on number 6, because then it does 2 octaves. So. And then you have even on the number 8, 3 octaves. And all the notes of the scale, of course, in between to go to this octave. So this is the random function. And the next what we can use and check out is the Portamento. And the Portamento, we can now directly put it here in and show to you what it does when we use like a lower value. Then the Portamento is, the glide rate is really fast. When you use the 8, it is the slowest. When we use the 9, then it's direct. And when we use the 0, we have a random value for it. Meaning, when we have programmed a general Portamento on the track, we can then with the direct, of course, erase it for certain steps. So this is the Portamento. Let's go to the next step component. The next step component is the sweep. And the sweep goes now especially into the parameters of your synthesizer engine, what you have on board of the OPZ, and actually for all of them in a similar way. If it's a sample track or a synth engine, you have on value 1, when you use it, a filter which goes up. You have, I make it just one note now. You have on 2, the filter down. Depending, of course, always on your default value, which you already have inside of your sound. So the next is then not filter. The next is then synth up, meaning it changes the parameter of your synth engine. And let's have different one where we can instantly hear it. Here. It now changes with going upwards the synth parameter. The same is then on the next step, on number 4, the synth parameter down. Depending also again on the engine you're using. You can hear it sometimes more, sometimes less. The next is then the panning. So it works then as a sweep on the panning. You can now hear the sound panning around. And then it's only this one note where you put it. The other one is then not panning. And it goes on the number 6. We have a slow filter up, a long filter up. Then a slow and long filter down. On the 8th, we have then the synth up. Then we take again a different sound. Here we can hear it much more effect. on the 9, synth down, long, and on the 10 we have, of course to select it, we have the panning, more massive than on the step number 5. So this is the sweep. The next is called tonality. And tonality is having a lot of different functions which change from number to number. So it's important that you memorize them, or you have always your step component reference chart with you, and after a while you just will know it from the spine which function is put it on which key. So first of all is ignore the global programming of transpose, meaning I put it in number 1. Normally when I put now this note higher, so, yeah, it's now the same note. So when I go on transpose, normally all the notes should be transposed the same way. Now it's only the second note which is having not the step component that tells with the function tonality and number 1 to ignore the chord progression. Meaning you can now tell for certain notes to not change the tune. For example, this could be like a general bass tone or a drone which you want to go through the track to stay and never change the transposition. So you can do it, or you have one note of a chord which you want that it stays and is constantly like somehow a guiding note. Give it to this step and it will stay like this. The next step component for tonality is then transpose only. Then there's only done the transposition. Then comes the offset octave, meaning it's put it 1 octave up. Then it's the octave 5, so it's a 5th. Then on number 5 you have the offset 3rd. Then you have on 6 chromatic up, meaning 1 half tone upwards. Or on the 7 1 half tone downwards, so chromatic changing of the tune. And then we have on the 8, 9 and 0 different quantizations for the note itself, similar like we had it on the multiply before. We come to the next step component, in my opinion actually one of the most important one, because it changes drastically the signature of the track itself, and it changes also for each sequence, each own step and track, the rhythmic order of the song or the structure of your patterns. And it helps you also to sort them again. When you have a lot of step components, and I told you about this jump function in the beginning, about the pulse, which puts extra step into the step and then nudges all the other tracks, then you have the opportunity with this function to jump back into the global timing. So basically we have a look into all the different kind of jumps. First of all, I make my 16 tracks active again. So now I tell, for example, for this step, jump back to start. So you can see it jumps back to start. This is the number 1. You can also tell it, and now we take this step away. So what was it? Yeah. You can also tell the system jump from here directly to the second quarter note. So we do that on the 2. Jump to 2. And you can see, it jumps directly over here to the next. You can also tell it jump then to the third quarter, and it does. And you can see it leaves out all these steps here. Or you can tell it jump to the fourth quarter. Or you can tell it jump forward one step. Do that. Basically, it does now what it should do, just jumping one forward. Or you can tell it jump one back. Then it stays, of course, on this note. Or you can tell it on the number 7, jump to random. Each time it jumps somewhere else. And of course you can put a lot of these random jumps. Actually, you can put it for every track, having a random jump, and then you have, for example, a total chaotic selection of all the steps you programmed inside of your sequence. On the next step component, number 8, you have then the function stay, and now it just stays on this node. And on the 9, you have align to global track. And this, as I showed you, makes especially sense when you have some complex things going on. We put like a little sequence here. Put there like step component here, putting 4 steps with a ramp. And here on this node, we put like another. And then another ramp. But then we want that this node, which we just play now in octave, is again on number 4. So we tell it, for example, here, let's say here, align back into global track with the number 9. So now we have the craziness here going on. Done. And with the metronome, we should have done that a little bit earlier. And here we put, here we have 2 steps. Here we now also put only 2 steps. And here we jump now exactly back into alignment. And it's again always in the time. And also then when it starts here again, because normally when you nudge everything further, then the first note is also nudged, and basically you get more and more into an off. The good thing is you have with the next function, you have also the possibility, it's the so-called sparks, then to tell, just push it back, align it back into global track only after 4 times or after 8 times or only on the first time, and then let it run free. All this you can do with the sparks. And now we come to the most important step component beside the jump function. Actually, you never can say the most important because each one is having its function. But when we are on this, we can now with the sparks define certain time counters when something happens. Meaning we have 3 sparks. The first is for parameters, telling like, okay, I want only that all 9 times or 8 times or all 2 times, or randomly happens a certain change of synthesizer parameter change, a parameter lock, which is only on certain steps. With the second, you can decide, I want that the step component, which is put it into the step on a certain step, only happens on a certain position. And with the trigger spark, I can generally say this step should happen on number 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. And the great thing is we can build up chains of different kind of logics, saying, okay, we want to change a parameter change on this one step only all 2 times, but the step component for the ramp we want to have all 4 times, and then the pulse we want to have all 6 times, for example, and then on the 8th time we do a realign to the global tempo track. So basically you have a lot of possibilities. Now to explain you a little bit of, or to show you how the Spark works, it is we use now like a drum track which is already programmed. I copy it here into this here. So I switch off the keyboard sounds. So we put in, for example, here the bass drum. We say these bass drum hits only shall occur after 4 times. So I press the 4, now the 4 blinks and it happens only now, right now it happened all 4 times. When I press here again, then it blinks the 1, meaning it plays only the first time. Then pressed the next time you have only 1, 2, 3 blinking. So it happens always except on number 4th count. And then it happens always. It does not happen on the first count. And of course I can put here some more kick drums and say these here, or like having here an extra one. These 2 shall happen all 2 times, or basically always the first time. The next is then the spark, which is actually first, but I showed you now the spark for the trigger itself, for the step. We go to snare drum track. And we now at the moment have here programmed a spark for a parameter and a spark for the trigger itself. So as I told you, you can use always many different ones, and the spark here basically tells then just when you happen all the 4 times, please then put an extra reverb on it. So this is the spark. I show you another example, like putting here like having a bass sound running. And we want always that these notes are all 4 times then heavily filtered. So let's go to this track. So and having first of all like the notes itself. So, and now we tell him with step components, do this trigger spark always the 2nd time. Well, there is another trigger here programmed. I take this away. Let's have a look again on this track. I put here my filter. And now I tell for these 4 tracks, put the spark only on the 2nd. And Now the filter only happens on the second time. This is the parameter spark, and the parameter spark is of course working on number 1, on number 2. So when I press number 1, it basically comes always. On number 2, I can decide it happens all 2 times, the first of it or the second of it. With 3, then all 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, 6 times, 7 times, 8 times. And then on the 9, it's then random. Sometimes you have to wait long for random. And finally, on the 10, you have a so-called reset counter, and you reset then your counter. The next, or basically the last, is, as I told you, then the function to put on other step components. For example, I want to put on all notes playing it in an octave ramp. Yeah, we do that now. So normally it would be and now I can tell to the sequencer, do this ramp only all times, and then do, for example, not only like an change a ramp up, also play 30-second notes. So then this happens only every second time. So now I have showed you the sparks, and together with the jump and all the other step components, you have now extremely multifunctional opportunities to spice up your sequences, to give them some more liveliness, to put single steps out of quantization sometimes or always. You can put it and program it for each step, like a own micro timing, a own length change, a change of velocity, and as I told you, also like a change of signature of your whole track. So I hope you got them all. Of course, it's a lot of step components, it will take some time, and there will be certain step components which you use quite often. For example, it is quite normal having only 16 steps and wanting to program a whole drum pattern. Then you put all the variations in your kick drum within your trigger spark function by like telling, okay, I want to have this off note only all 4 times, and so on. And also, for example, for the hi-hat programming, having velocity changes on a randomized mode. And all this helps a lot in fast programming while you play and perform, so it gets never boring, while you never need to play basically to put a stop on your performance, because you can build up your song while it runs by putting step components. The great thing is you don't need to press stop to put in the step components, you just put them on the fly. So in my opinion, it's a fantastic tool, and I wish you a lot of fun with it, a lot of inspiration, and I'm happy that you watched my tutorial. If you liked it, I would be happy if you put the like button, or if you even want to see more videos or always informed when it comes out something new, then it would be nice if you would have me on a regular base on your screen. Otherwise, enjoy the OPC. It's a wonderful machine. More tutorials to come about it, because there is so many still functions which can be conquered on this device, and I want to show them to you all. I'm happy that you watched. I wish you a great day and a wonderful new year. Bye.